Hello everyone, Costume Teacher here, and I'm here today to read to you a chapter from the book Mr. Popper's Penguins. In fact, today we are reading chapter 1. It's time to get this book started. All right, now before each chapter, I'll go over some vocabulary words that I want to make sure we are all familiar with as we read the story. All right. So those words in this chapter are untidy is our first word. That's on page 3. Can everyone say untidy? That means messy. I hope no one has an untidy desk these days. Looking at you. The next word is absent-minded. That's on page 5. Can everyone say absent-minded? That means not paying attention because you're thinking about something else. Teachers, students, this never happens in class, does it? No, not at all. Moving on. And our final word for this chapter is expedition. Can everyone say expedition? That's on page 6. That means a trip for a specific purpose. I think in the story, someone's going to go on an expedition. All right, well, let's begin. I'm going to be reading from this version of the book. So when I reference page numbers, if you're looking at a different version, just go by the chapter in your book. And if you don't have a book, then just listen and follow along with me. All right, chapter 1, Stillwater. It was an afternoon in late September. In the pleasant little city of Stillwater, Mr. Popper, the house painter, was going home from work. He was carrying his buckets, his ladders, and his boards, so that he had a rather hard time moving along. He was spattered here and there with paint and calcimine, and there were bits of wallpaper clinging to his hair and whiskers, for he was rather an untidy man. The children looked up from their play to smile at him as he passed, and the housewives, seeing him, said, "Oh, dear, there goes Mr. Popper. I must remember to ask John to have the house painted over in the spring." No one knew what went on inside of Mr. Popper's head, and no one guessed that he would one day be the most famous person in Stillwater. He was a dreamer. Even when he was busiest, smoothing down the paste on the wallpaper or painting the outside of other people's houses, he would forget what he was doing. Once he had painted 3 sides of a kitchen green and the other side yellow. The housewife, instead of being angry and making him do it over, had liked it so well that she had made him leave it that way. And all the other housewives, when they saw it, admired it too. And so that pretty soon, everybody in Stillwater had 2 colored kitchens. The reason Mr. Popper was so absent-minded was that he was always dreaming about faraway countries. He had never been out of Stillwater. Not that he was unhappy. He had a nice little house of his own, a wife whom he loved dearly, and 2 children named Janie and Bill. But still, it would have been nice, he often thought, if he could have seen something of the world before he met Mrs. Popper and settled down. He had never hunted tigers in India, or climbed the peaks of the Himalayas, or dived for pearls in the South Seas. Above all, he had never seen the poles. That was what he regretted most of all. He had never seen those great, shining, white expanses of ice and snow. How he wished he had been a scientist instead of a house painter in Stillwater, so that he might have joined some of the great polar expeditions. Since he could not go, he was always thinking about them. And here's a picture of him on that page. Whenever he heard that a polar movie was in town, he was the first person at the ticket window, and often he sat through 3 shows. Whenever the town library had a new book about the Arctic or the Antarctic, the North Pole or the South Pole, Mr. Popper was the first to borrow it. Indeed, he had read so much about polar explorers that he could name all of them and tell you what each had done. He was quite an authority on the subject. His evenings were the best time of all. Then he could sit down in his little house and read about those cold regions at the top and the bottom of the earth. And as he read, he could take the little globe that Janie and Bill had given him the Christmas before and search out the exact spot he was reading about. So now, as he made his way through the streets, he was happy because the day was over and because it was the end of September. When he came to the gate of the neat little bungalow at 432 Proudfoot Avenue, he turned in. "Well, my love," he said, setting down his buckets and ladders and boards and kissing Mrs. Popper, "the decorating season is over. I have painted all the kitchens in Stillwater. I have papered all the rooms in the new apartment building on Elm Street. There is no more work until spring, when people will want their houses painted." Mrs. Popper sighed. "I sometimes wish you had the kind of work that lasted all year, instead of just from spring to fall," she said. "It will be very nice to have you home for a vacation, of course, but it is a little hard to sweep with a man sitting around reading all day." "I could decorate the house for you." "No, indeed," said Mrs. Popper firmly. "Last year you painted the bathroom 4 different times because you had nothing else to do, and I think that is enough of that. But what worries me is the money. I've saved a little, and I dare say we can get along as we have other winters. No more roast beef, no more ice cream, not even on Sundays." "Shall we have beans every day?" asked Janie and Bill, coming in from play. "I'm afraid so," said Mrs. Popper. "Anyway, go wash your hands for supper. And Papa, put away this litter of paints because you won't be needing them for quite a while." Well, and that is the end of chapter 1. All right. Well, we've met the family and we've heard about Mr. Popper's job and what he wishes he was doing. Traveling. If you could travel somewhere, where would you go today? Would you go to the North Pole or the South Pole? Maybe. Anyway, well, it's been fun to have you here, and I will see you again soon for chapter 2. Bye.